Good evening to all of you. My name is Tom Ross, and I'm the president of the Volcker Alliance, and I'd like to welcome each of you to the 2020 State Fiscal Conference, Truth and Integrity in State Budgeting, Looming Risk and Durable Solutions. This event is the fourth in our series of state budget convenings with regional Federal Reserve banks, and we could not be more excited about the conversations ahead of us tonight and tomorrow. I'd like to extend my sincere thanks and gratitude to the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta for hosting us here today. It's been wonderful and will be, I'm sure, equally wonderful tomorrow, and for partnering with the Volcker Alliance to plan this superlative event. So as you enjoy your dessert, allow me a moment to tell you a bit about the Volcker Alliance and why we care about truth and integrity in state budgeting. The mission of the Volcker Alliance is to advance effective management of government to achieve results that matter to citizens. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization founded by former Federal Reserve Chair Paul Volcker. And we aim to advance effective government at all levels, federal, local, state, and with particularly in this project within all 50 states. As I believe most of you here know, under the leadership of Bill Glaskell, the Volcker Alliance, he is the Volcker Alliance Senior Vice President and Director of State and Local Initiatives. With his leadership, the Volcker Alliance has been driving the Truth and Integrity in Government Finance initiative since 2014. The project's goal is to help improve budgeting and fiscal sustainability in the states by identifying practices that need improvement, providing concrete examples of best practices for all to follow, and helping states sustainably improve practices and their laws. At the core of the initiative, the Alliance developed a unique methodology for evaluating state budget processes that was reviewed by more than 36 current and former state budget and public finance practitioners, as well as public finance professors at schools with which the Alliance has partnered. The methodology facilitates analysis of budget practices of all 50 states in 5 key categories, providing a firm basis for grading relative budgeting performance and financial reporting in the areas that we've measured, including clarity and integrity. As the latest chapter in this impressive and influential initiative, we are excited to release a brand new publication as part of this conference, and which all of you will be the first to receive, entitled Rainy Day Fund Strategies, A Call to Action. The paper examines the rainy day fund policies and practices of all 50 states, building on grades in the report and supplemental research. We lay out a pathway for states to protect, strengthen, and leverage rainy day funds as crucial budgetary tools, and we spotlight best practice examples for states to follow. A special thanks goes to Catherine Baird and Richard Green for their hard work on this paper. They're here, raise your hand, so we can thank you. We believe this will be an extremely useful tool for practitioners throughout the United States. With that and our dynamic program to look forward to, let me now turn to our keynote conversation, featuring Shirley Clark Franklin. In 2002, Franklin was elected mayor of Atlanta, becoming the first African-American female mayor of a major southern city, and she served 2 terms. Atlanta experienced unprecedented growth under Franklin's 8 years as mayor. Mayor Franklin may be best known for developing successful business and public sector partnerships and tackling major government operations and ethics reform. She launched the Atlanta Beltline and planned and executed more than $5 billion in airport and water infrastructure improvements. Mayor Franklin also led the acquisition of the Morehouse College collection of the papers of Martin Luther King Jr. and started Atlanta's Regional Commission on Homelessness. In addition to her role as a public official, her community service spans nearly 40 years in Atlanta and comprises her active participation in the arts, homelessness, and higher education. On top of all of that, and we think most importantly, she is a member of the Volcker Alliance Board of Directors. And let me tell you, if you have Shirley Franklin on your board, you have a leg up on almost everybody else in the world because she is really insightful and wonderful. Having served more than 3 decades as an executive in government and business, Mayor Franklin is a frequent speaker and subject matter expert on leadership, public policy, and community engagement. Now, Shirley is the executive board chair of Purpose-Built Communities, and we're very fortunate to have her expertise and perspective as a member of our board, and you will benefit from that expertise and perspective tonight. Franklin will be joined by James Salzer. Mr. Salzer is an assistant senior editor for state government and politics at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He has covered government and politics for the better part of his 36 years in journalism, first as a political writer and columnist for the Abilene Reporter News, then as a local government reporter for the Florida Times-Union, and finally as a State House reporter, editor, and investigative journalist in Atlanta for Morris News Service and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution since 1990. At the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Salzer has specialized in stories on state spending, taxes, pensions, campaign finance, and legislative culture. There's probably no journalist better equipped to discuss with Mayor Franklin the critical interplay among municipal, state, and federal budgets and how this complicated relationship can be improved. So please join me in welcoming Shirley Clark Franklin and James Salzer for what I know will be a very interesting conversation.
You want to sit there? All right. You got yours on?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, no. Okay.
All right.
I think, yeah.
You think?
Yeah.
So I wanted to tell one story before they were going through all your accomplishments. Mayor Franklin and I had lunch a couple weeks ago at a barbecue place, and one of the things that isn't brought up very often is that the street conditions in Atlanta, those of you who lived in Atlanta and actually drove them, realized how terrible they were when she took office. A street that I used to drive home on had potholes big enough to raise a family of 4 in, and you would have to get your front end aligned every 3 months or so. And we were right down the street from one of these places, and she started the pothole posse. And how many potholes did you fill in like 6 months?
6,000.
6,000, including the ones on my street. Had nothing to do with no connection there. But anyways, thank you for being here. And one of the first things I wanted to talk about was the people here are mostly in state government. Now, when you took over in 2002, you faced.
So I don't get to tell a story about you. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, no.
No, I didn't recognize him today. I mean, I said, woo, most reporters are not this dressed up. So I almost didn't recognize him. Last time I saw him, I had on Bermuda shorts.
Just for you.
So this is a special occasion.
That's right. So when you took office, you faced many of the same problems that Governor Perdue here and governors around the country faced. You accomplished what you accomplished, but at a time when you were coming out of the dot-com 9/11 recession, and then you as you were leaving, you were heading into the Great Recession. Tell us a little bit about like what you came into and how you dealt with the financial problems that the city was facing.
So when I was elected, I had lots of people, many of you, and people just like you, who had lots of advice. I mean, they had advice. If I went to a dinner like this, sat next to someone, they immediately gave me, my top priorities. And so the election is in November, and I went to the Chamber of Commerce dinner or luncheon in that December. And I happened to sit next to former Governor Busby. And he gave me a really important piece of advice. He said, Shirley, I don't care what they tell you is in the city's budget. You have to do your own budget. If you don't do your own budget and you are not completely familiar with the city's budget and setting the priorities, you just won't be able to get anything done. And it was an interesting point because at that point, the city's budget, I had about 6.5 weeks, 7 weeks to do that. So it seemed like I should just adopt the budget of the prior administration and work on the city budget, for the next year. And he just was adamant. He was adamant that we needed to go as deep as we could on the city budget and understanding it. And it ended up being a really important factor in our ability to get anything done, including potholes. Because we then, after hearing his emphasis, we then basically doubled down and spent, this is before I was inaugurated in January. So this is early December, and we spent the next 5 or 6 weeks, brought a team of people together, and really just went through the budget very, very closely. It resulted in a couple of recommendations that people did not expect. And we were coming out of the dot-com, would be 02. We were coming out of the dot-com and the kind of the softness of the budget. I recommended 40% increase in property taxes. That's a way to get reelected, right? But equally, I recommended that we lay off 1,000 employees. So now I got the left and the right. Everybody is up in arms about that. But that ended up being an important set of recommendations. And I don't want to take a lot of credit for that budget because you know what you can get done in 6 weeks, right? It got much better as the years went on. So finding a way to balance the budget, to understand it, to get the entire executive team on board, and then to do our best job in developing a kind of community consensus around that made a big difference in the perception people had of what kind of governance we were going to, how we were going to govern. So I ran into Lester Maddox, who's another former governor, at a restaurant.
An interesting one.
And one of the things, and Betty Talmadge, the former senator's wife, at another event. One of the things that I recommended in recommending the 40% tax increase, property tax increase, and the layoffs, was that I cut my salary 30%. And I ran into Lester Maddox, and he said, "Little lady, you got a future in politics." So it was the combination of really digging deep and also then making it a kind of an acceptable set of recommendations that really helped us to steady ourselves long enough to really understand the budget by the second, third, and the fourth year.
And then you went through it again 7 years later, your second term.
Well, then we never stopped. I mean, we recognized that we had to work on budgeting literally every month of every, not just a few months before the budget, which has been the history. I'd worked for 2 mayors.
Right.
And we kind of changed that and started really digging deeper and creating dashboards and understanding the inner workings of the government operations so that the budget reflected not just our needs, but also our aspirations. And the need side sometimes comes second to aspirations, but finding that balance where the budget was representing both. Now, in my next to last year, I had to come back with another I know you're trying to figure out how I got reelected.
90%, yeah.
Yeah, but the bottom line is I came back after the Great Recession and had to recommend a property tax increase again. And fortunately, those who followed me haven't even had to look at that. But that worked for me because I was more at the end of my political career.
Right.
And therefore, I wasn't looking for another job, another political job. And one of my favorite stories, and I'll get off of this, is people run into me, and just a gentleman when I was walking here this evening, walking down the street, he said, "We really miss you at City Hall." And I didn't give him my typical answer, which is, "You all ran me out of City Hall." You pretty much ran me out. You know, you act like I don't remember that. Right? Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, it's really hard to make those decisions because it's counter to what you want to say. You can do more with less.
Right.
And the expectation is you can do more, but you can't do much more. You can do some things more, but you can't do all of the things. You can maybe take care of the needs, but you can't take care of the aspirations of a community, typically. So, but we also tripled water and sewer rates. For those people in Atlanta know this. People from outside may not. But I happen to be one of those. I don't make any bones about the fact that it costs resources. It's not always money. Sometimes it's time. Sometimes it's land. Sometimes it's expertise. But you need resources to move a community forward. And sometimes that is money. And you cannot run away from that.
And many of the things that you talked about are things that people are also asking you for. I mean, people didn't want to be able to walk out on their street and when it rained and have sewer water in the streets. I mean, there was things like that.
Well, I get we get a lot of credit for sewers, but it really is a federal judge. I mean, we had a consent decree, and the judge was not budging, and so we had to live up to the consent decree. And fortunately, the city has done that now for 15 years.
Yeah. The title of this conference includes Looming Risks, which is scary, and Durable Solutions. What are some of the things that durable solutions that anybody can use that you experienced from dealing with financial crisis?
One of the most effective strategies that we had, which was not mine, but I adopted, it came up from staff. One of the most effective strategies was to enlist the private sector to help us find solutions. So that when we had a solution or we came up with options, we had broader buy-in on the front end. And I could name 20 different things that we did that well, including water and sewer. We had a water and sewer consent decree. But in addition to that, we went to the president of Georgia Tech, asked him to convene a group of scientists and engineers to look at our consent decree, to look at our plan, and then to make recommendations. And they saved us $250 million, not bad savings, but also broadened the consensus, the community's consensus for what we were about to undertake. And he and that committee lent their credibility to that made it easier for us to do all the things we needed to do to fund it, and frankly, still fund it today. So enlisting academia, enlisting the private sector, where we were looking at a project and 2 private sector CEOs asked for, they had agreed to serve on the committee or chair the committee, but they wanted to know what I wanted the outcome to be. I mean, and these would be names that people in Atlanta would know. And I said, if I knew the outcome, I wouldn't need a committee, right? That, I was really looking for their unvarnished kind of advice and counsel. And if they would do that, then I would handle the politics. Right. So that's one way that we went about this. Everything from homelessness to the consent decree work to the Atlanta Beltline to, just a wide variety of initiatives, retooling the inner workings of certain of city operations, even the pothole posse.
Yeah, one of the groups you did not mention is your relationship and getting help from state and federal government on some of these. What was your relationship like with the then Governor Perdue?
I was delighted to have a relationship with him. I'd been active in politics, so he had not been the candidate that I had supported. He knew it, but he was open to have a private meeting right after his election, and we sat down. I'm a person of few words and very few priorities, and I talked to him about the importance of the airport, to the economy of the state and the region, and gave him my perspective on where we were going and how we were operating, and asked that we would have a ongoing dialogue about that. And then I also talked to him about the long-term needs of the state around water access, and had some ideas about that. And we stayed, for the most part, related to that. And we agreed in that meeting that if we had anything to say to each other, we would not call you, but we would call each other. And we did that.
What?
Yeah. We did that for the 7 years that we were in office at the same time. I mean, there was never an occasion. And that was, sometimes the other person proposed it. Most of the time I proposed that ought to be, that we should not talk to each other through the press or through intermediaries. I had watched earlier in my career, elected officials work through third parties to have conversations, and it just seemed to me that was not the most effective way to do it.
What about,
and I wasn't willing to do that.
I was going to say, what about a lot of people are dealing with now, besides cities dealing with states, obviously trying to deal with the federal government. And
but let me finish. But I was not a foreigner under the Capitol. I mean, I was there for a lot of things. I mean, during the legislative session, I was there a couple of times a week. I was there during the beginning of the session, the end of the session, not because I'd been invited, right, but because it was a public session and I wanted to get to know people. So I went out of my way to have open conversations with people at the state, even people who were on the other side, that you would think were on the other side of me politically, or me or them. So we always, that was true. I knew the next governor, Governor Deal, because he was a member of Congress. Right. And so water and sewer, I knew everybody in Congress around that issue. I made a unsuccessful case that the federal government ought to be a partner in the funding. They knew who we were. We did some things that they really did not like. Like on the water bills one month, we published the email addresses and phone numbers of everyone, starting with the President of the United States and the U.S. senators and the people on the back of the letter. And I basically said, we're doing everything we can, but we need you to call. And the Senate, several of the two of our, they shut down some of the systems. So, but they knew, as I said, they knew on that issue that we were going to push the envelope. So there was kind of an understanding of that. Yeah. So I wasn't, we were not always trying to jump on the bandwagon. What? And the federal government.
What would it be like now also, do you think?
I don't think I would do it any differently. I would be in Washington. I learned that from, there's a Dr. Sullivan,
Louis Sullivan.
Louis Sullivan. Louis Sullivan, in order to build the Morehouse School of Medicine, was in Washington every single week. And he made the rounds. And that was his advice to me. They need to know you, see you. I mean, it's harder now because everyone communicates by email and text. But his theory was people need to know you. You need to develop relationships. And I think some of that is still the case. The technology is fine, but it's not sufficient always to develop a relationship.
The current administration has been very supportive, at least verbally, of deregulation and of block granting programs to states, and saying, you know, we're going to let the states and the cities do more on their own. What do you think of that idea? You think the cities are capable and the states are capable of doing some of that
Cities
stuff?
capable, of course they are.
Yeah. You're not mayor anymore.
No, of course cities are capable of doing that. And cities do comprehensive development plans. They do long-range financial plans. They do infrastructure plans. I mean, they do transportation plans. And they have a long history. I mean, I've just named a few. So certainly cities are capable of that. I mean, here's what I think you miss if that is the extreme case, where everyone's doing their own thing. You miss the interconnection between Atlanta and Charlotte, or Birmingham and New Orleans. You miss the regional work that needs to be done around, and I'm talking about infrastructure now, that the country can't just be these silos. That's not how I mean, I'm not an economist, but that doesn't appear to me to be the way the economy functions the best. The movement of people and goods and services requires interconnectability. And if you don't have that because you are planning in silos, that's a mistake. It could advantage those regions that do that and do that best. And there are some regions of the country that do that better than others, depending on the issue. So the truth of the matter is Atlanta probably would not have fixed its sewers anytime soon had we not had federal regulations. Had we not had the EPA and the Clean Water Act and a federal judge and the suits, we would not have the clean water initiatives, because they're too hard, they were too expensive, they were too unpopular, and you'd have to be almost crazy as a mayor to take that on. The backup for me was the judge said I had to do it. So if you take away that if you minimize the regulation and say, well, just go do what you want to do, well, the water line, the drinking water line, the water that came out of the faucet today on Peachtree Street, right out in front of this building, was put in 1892. When I was in office in 2002. I'd say we got our money's worth.
And what was it made out of?
Wood. 1892. And that's with regulation. I mean, it would have been a trough, without any regulation. So my only point is that some things require a national strategy, and national strategies require specifications and regulations and monitoring. Now, maybe that's not everything. So anyway, that's my piece on water.
What do the state of Georgia's budget, I want to say, and Chairman Hill can correct me, it's about $14 billion a year in federal funding, and the cities, I'm sure, get a big chunk as well. With rising debt and deficits, do you think there's a future of that'll be the first thing that'll be cut back?
Well, I think there's when you get the deficit up, I think there's going to be a big push to lower the deficit, and then the question is what gets cut. And some things don't ever seem to get cut.
Yeah.
And water infrastructure, I know a lot about water. Water and transportation infrastructure are two of the areas that really are not adequately funded today. They're just not funded either by the federal government or most states adequately today. I mean, America needs to invest in those things that matter for the long-term health of the country, the economy and its people. Now, maybe that means we have to divert the money from some others use. But I think you can make a case. I am an example of doing all the things people say you can't do and get elected. Raise property taxes twice, laid people off. I'm a liberal Democrat, so that didn't go well, okay, on the left. Tripled water and sewer rates, and I was reelected with 91% of the vote. So it's possible to do. Either that or people thought I was just so crazy.
They're like, yeah, you know. I wanted, before we get to the question and answer, or question period, wanted to ask you about one of your passions, which is affordable housing, and the project you're working on. Where we ate the other day, as we talked about, was an area that was, I don't know, blighted is the right word, but it wasn't a great area to live in for the people that were living there. And now you and I can't afford houses there because it's so expensive, largely because of a development project. Talk a little bit about what you're working on and the importance of.
So my plan for my life was to do community development and to work primarily with women's groups, and that's what I wanted to do 35 years ago. And ended up in politics and in government, and it was a wonderful career, but that was not my passion. So I'm now able to work in the area of community development with an organization called Purpose-Built Communities, which is grown out of a model, mixed income housing, excellent schools, and community wellness, founded by Tom Cousins, Eva Davis, and Renee Glover. A housing authority executive director, a resident leader, and a philanthropist. And they came up with a model that basically says we need to improve neighborhoods, not just family options, so that we can close the wealth gap, so that we can close the racial disparity gap, and so that we can expand opportunity. And that model, which is a not-for-profit, one of the models that people are now studying really in universities across the country, to see if that is a better model for helping to undo and reverse concentrated poverty and all of the negatives that come with that. So anyone who's interested in that, Purpose-Built Communities, East Lake Foundation, I'm delighted to talk to you about it.
And you're in how many cities?
We're in 22 cities. Mr. Cousins thinks we should be in 122. It's a lot slower, harder work. It's disruptive because it's different. Some people want to do housing. Some people want to do schools. Some people want to do community support and engagement. We say you have to do all three together simultaneously, and it's really tough to do. So if you're interested, we are interested in talking to you.
Okay, I think we've got time for questions from the audience.
That went fast, huh? I talk too much. Any questions?
Any questions? Go ahead.
I've got a question, James, for both of you. Volcker Alliance over your shoulder said working for effective government. What role did media have in effective government? I worry an awful lot about the demise of our newspapers and modern media, and worry that democracy doesn't work without an educated voter. And I'm curious from your standpoint, and maybe from James.
Well, there's no question that we found in my administration, the media, a really important partner. So in those first few weeks, we were doing briefings every single day because we needed the public to be engaged. More than once, staff would come to me and say media had a question about something, and I was the leak. I was the person who had actually given them the story because I believed that I learned from Andrew Young that the media is going to write a story or tell a story every single day. You're better off if you are talking to them that they might tell your story. So we had a really robust exchange and interchange. Now, saying it and doing it are two different things. Saying you want to be transparent, we can all say that. Being transparent is a lot harder to do. And it does try your soul sometimes because it requires you to really just kind of peel the onion and recognize that you're going to have to stand up and say you made mistakes. And that's not a comfortable place to be, certainly not for elected officials. So it's not the easiest thing to do, but it was essential to convincing people that we knew what we were doing. And the media actually named, like the pothole posse, I don't know what I was calling it, but somebody from the media said, well, you need to, I had pledged that if you found a pothole and you called the city, and it wasn't filled in 72 hours, I would come and fill it myself. That was my pledge.
Yeah, which I did.
So, so that was my pledge. But the media called me and said, that sounds like a pothole posse. So, I mean, there's really a give and take and having that ongoing conversation. And then, of course, I called them like a lot of us do and said, what in the world are you writing about? But not taking it personally. That's the other hard thing. Being willing not to take the criticism or the inquiry personally, which seems to be hard for some folks in public life.
You think?
Well, I didn't mean anybody in particular.
Yeah.
No, I really didn't. I can name more people than you think. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So for you?
Yeah, I'm the wrong person to speak on this because I could speak for weeks on it. I obviously think it's very important, and I'm appalled a lot on what I see on Twitter and Facebook in particular, and social media in general. We ran into, I think we got a taste of what next year's election will be like in Georgia last year. We had a very contested governor's race between Stacey Abrams, a Democrat, and Brian Kemp, a Republican. Anytime we would post a story, we would just get inundated with criticism. From whatever side didn't like the story, but Twitter and other social media have made it easier for people to say stuff they probably shouldn't. If they thought about it, they maybe wouldn't say. And I don't think that's. I don't think it's good for democracy and media in general, and I don't think it's good for those kind of entities to be considered media. I'm not a big watcher of the 8 to 11 o'clock talking head shows, for instance, because I think it's fine for people to go on and have opinions, but I don't know that I'm informed after I watch that. So that's one of the reasons I guess I support what would be considered the old media. Because we're the people who are going to City Hall and covering committee meetings and going through the budget and following things for the public, because the public isn't going to be at Chairman Hill's 7 a.m. Budget meetings.
It's much more complicated now with social media. Social media was just starting when I left office in 2009. It's much more complicated today. I started answering my own emails in office, and there was an occasion I had to be in the office all weekend, and it was a horrendous situation. And so I just started going online and reading them myself, and people said the craziest things, and I'd answer some of them.
At 3 a.m. on Twitter.
Well, at all times. So you have to be really careful. I mean, what James has said, you have to be really careful, which is why everyone in this room and people like you become important, because you become people who are credible and who can stop the foolishness. I mean, I have children who are in their 40s, and when they were in their 20s, they'd start quoting, celebrities on a policy issue. And I was like, okay, music, yes. Acting, yes, but do I really care what they think about this? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
Now, you know, as they age, they got a little more sophisticated too.
At
I'm
20,
like,
they do.
Yeah, but I mean, that's like, really? So we have to be careful. I mean, freedom of, there's somebody in the audience who had a conversation with me earlier today. And we were talking about a celebrity. And I was like, that's a wrong place to start with me on a public policy issue. Right? No, right?
Plus, more than likely, I don't even know who they're talking about. So.
Well, I knew who they were talking about, but I'm too old school, I guess.
Yeah.
Other
same here.
questions?
More of a comment. You mentioned Eastlake. I don't know that it's gotten as much coverage as I would like to see, but the charter team at Eastlake won the high school championship this year, having not had a team until
The golf,
just 2
you
years.
mean?
Yes, golf team. Yes.
Oh, yeah, and that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah. So
It's the first, yeah, it's an all African-American inner city golf team that won the championship. They're really great.
it's a
They're-
cool golf course. I've had a chance to play golf with Dennis once before. I think they can beat both of us.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they're really excited. Two of them are seniors and going to college on the golf scholarships. It's really, it is really a great story.
Yeah,
But
they built for those of you who don't know the story, they built a school and attached it to a YMCA, which happens to be my YMCA, so that's why I know about this. But it's really, it's interesting to go there during the day because they incorporate swim, and they incorporate things that probably the average school, it's not so easy to incorporate, so that maybe have something. And they also have the driving range right outside the door.
so it's a STEAM school, not a STEM school. So the A is art. So they've put art in the full curriculum. So every child does violin at second grade and golf at third grade and swimming, harp and
family
robotics. And
Yeah,
it's a very interesting model.
it is. More
But
questions?
thank you for mentioning that, because that's great. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
cool course. It's a cool part of the city that all of us in Atlanta would tell you that none of us would have gone 25, 30 years ago.
I played there back when it was gunfire.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, it's changed that whole area of the city. But you know, that presents a challenge because the community that it replaces was public housing. Now it's mixed income. So you have a mix of market rate and publicly subsidized housing. There's a lot of debate nationally and statewide as to whether there should be a mix at all, whether all of it should be subsidized housing. We argue that the neighborhood is stronger with the income mix. So then the question is, can you build enough so that you're not displacing people? And then the property values in the surrounding neighborhood have increased. And Andrew and I were talking about the High Line in New York and how the property values 20 years later are such that a recent college graduate would have a hard time even with a job. So, I mean, the issue of affordability is one that is hard to tackle. Yes, exactly. And they had no grocery store. 40 years without a building permit in that neighborhood. It's a long time. Other questions in the back?
Did you have success with effectively taxing in order to generate resources? What's your thoughts relative to use tax versus income tax? And we've heard more around the presidential elections in different states pursuing the millionaire taxes and all this. How do you see the balance?
So fortunately, I'm out of public life, so I can have a personal opinion.
So this is an easy answer, easy
Yeah,
question
well,
to
I
answer.
don't know if
then.
it's easy. It also means I haven't thought about it as much, right? No. So the sewer tax is a use tax, and we were able to sell it as a use tax, and we changed the formula. Originally, the less you used, the more you use, the less we charge for water. We reversed that, so that the less you use, the less we charge. That was a huge debate on the city council and locally. So I don't see how we're going to get around income tax. I don't see how we're going to get around, I mean, as a country, just based on all my list of things we need to invest in, I don't see how we're going to get around income tax, and I don't see how we're going to get around people who have more money spending more. I don't see how we get around that. I mean, Georgia has 400,000 or 500,000 people without health care, and we got to fix that. Not because I have it, but we've got to fix it some kind of way. We're not going to be able to go another 50 years, in my opinion, in that direction. Something strange is going to happen in the country that none of us have seen before or haven't seen in a long time. So I think income tax is one of the ways to do that. But you've got to make I mean, in order to raise those fees, even for user taxes, and we did sales tax too, which is considered a regressive tax. So the water system is funded by the sales tax that you pay when you go out the door. 1 cent of the 8 cents goes to the water and sewer system in Atlanta, plus user fees. So it's a very expensive proposition. And it took me as a mayor working on that every single day for 2 straight years to convince people that this was the right approach. So my point is, it's going to take a lot more than talking heads and just having members of Congress and folks from the White House in order to get the right mix. And I don't like paying taxes any more than anyone else. When I get my water bill, I often say, who is the mayor? You know? Who did this to me? I'm trying to water my vegetable garden, you know?
I think it was Kasim Reed. Yeah.
No, you're right. Other questions?
Hi. You mentioned the White House just now, and I was curious. You talked about the consent decree and sewers and having sort of political cover because of the federal government. And there's been so much written about the federal government's sort of disengagement from cities. And I'm just wondering, looking ahead, sort of what do you see as the way that the federal government should be involved, or do you see the state as being a more important actor these days?
I think either one can be helpful in a city like Atlanta. State policy, I'll just say state water policy matters, could matter. State transportation policy. I mean, I could give you several examples around transportation where state officials, not necessarily the governor, approached me about certain regional transportation plans where they wanted me to take the front. They wanted me to be the face of the campaign for a lot of the reasons that you've heard today. And I told them that I'd be happy to be a face, but I would stand behind the governor and the state leadership. They didn't like that answer. I said, I'm doing it with you, but I'm not going to be the only one out here talking about, raising taxes or gas taxes or whatever the case may be. That was not, we were friendly about it, and it was behind closed doors, and I've never told that story before. But, for the purposes of this, I think there does have to be a partnership. If you look at the revenue that comes from metropolitan Atlanta into the state budget, which I did years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, it is in their business interest to solve the transportation issues. Forget their political interests. It is in their business interest to solve the transportation problems for the movement of people and goods. And I would have been willing to help as a mayor, but I wasn't willing to take all of the hits for that. So the state would be fine. I still would like some federal support where we could find it.
We have time for one more.
Yes, so Mayor, thank you very much for your talk today. I'm very curious, you mentioned, personally, I wouldn't mind paying more taxes if I know I'm getting the service or better service than what was previously provided to me as a citizen. So what did you do differently that caused your system to provide, to have the potholes fixed in 3 days, as opposed to previously?
I mean, we organized it. We counted them, for one thing. When I
But,
went,
but what did you do differently about your system to make
no,
it
I'm
work
telling
effectively?
you, the first thing I know that sounds like a simplistic answer. We recognized that we had a problem,
Okay.
okay, which is pretty much basic to solving a problem. And in addition to that, when we went to Public Works and said, how many potholes do we have?
Okay.
They said we have 500. We
Okay.
had 6,000.
6,000? Oh my goodness.
6,000. At the time, they told me they were 500 because they were not counting the potholes. They were not monitoring the system.
Right.
So there was no way they were going to be able to respond to it. And then we put together monitoring. We we trained people in filling potholes. We enlisted the support of the public and guaranteed them service, which we hadn't done up to then. Up until then, you were calling in a pothole, but you didn't know whether you were going to ever get it. Now the city has a 311 system where you can call in and make a report, and that was all started early on. So I agree with you. People have to see a benefit.
Right, yeah.
There's got to be a benefit. And I mean, those are some of the things related to potholes. But the same thing with the water and sewer system. When I went into office in 2002, the year before, the city had earned $80 million in water fines. So you get nothing for paying for those fines.
That's crazy.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
right.
EPA administrator came and said, you pay us $80 million for the fines for last year, or you do something differently. We reorganized the department. We started training staff. We started monitoring it so that our fines didn't disappear, but they went down to the thousands versus the millions.
Okay.
So as a ratepayer, you're paying for clean water, but you're actually, that year, we're going to be paying for fines,
Right, right.
for spills, for stormwater spill. You know, you shouldn't ask me about water because you know.
Okay.
Go
Well, the other question I
on
have.
and on and on.
Did
But
you
that
ever
is-
did you ever fill a pothole then?
I never had to fill a pothole.
Oh, good for you.
I
Wonderful.
filled the first one.
Oh, you did?
I filled the first one. I basically announced it in front of a pothole, and I filled a pothole.
Another question I have is, I mean, why aren't you helping other cities and states in this country with your program and your insights? I mean, I come from New Jersey, and I would love for you to be running Newark or.
Oh, Lord.
I told you they ran me out of Atlanta. Thank you for the compliment.
Okay.
There are lots of people there are lots of local officials doing great things. And sometimes hindsight is, better than, just is. So I'm happy to share my experiences. And there are some mayors, when the water in Flint was a problem, the U.S. Conference of Mayors asked me to lead a team to go to Flint and spend a few days with the mayor of Flint to talk her through some of the challenges that we faced here and how to do that. So typically people call me about water and sewer because that was such a big issue for me. But I know mayors and local officials, and I think governors do it as well, they share a lot of information. It's not necessarily always public. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, James.
Thank you.